She said it loud enough for the whole table to hear. She said I was an embarrassment. She said a man like me had no business trying to be generous when I could barely keep the lights on. That was the night I paid for a complete stranger's meal because the man looked like he hadn't eaten in 2 days, and my wife, the woman I had loved, worked for, and quietly carried for 11 years, looked me in the eye and said she was ashamed of me. That was the moment I stopped explaining myself. That was the moment something inside me went quiet in a way that never came back. I didn't yell. I didn't leave. I just looked at her, then looked at the old man eating the meal I had paid for, and I made a decision so small and so silent that nobody at that table even noticed it. But that decision changed everything. And what happened the next morning is something I still have to sit down to think about, because it proved something I had been too loyal to admit for a very long time. Some people in your life are not on your side. They never were. They were just waiting for you to stop being useful. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Think about the last time you did something kind, quietly, without expecting anything back, and the person closest to you made you feel small for it. Not a stranger. Someone who was supposed to know you. Someone who was supposed to choose you. Would you have walked away that night? Or would you have done what Julian did, stayed, watched, and waited until the truth had nowhere left to hide? Stay with this story. Because what you think is the betrayal at the beginning is not even close to the full picture. My name is Julian, and I need to tell you about the night everything I had quietly built started to quietly fall apart, and the morning I realized it had been falling apart for a long time before I was willing to see it. I was 39 years old. I had been married to my wife, Renata, for 11 years. We had a house in a mid-sized city, a son named Caleb who was 8 years old, and a life that looked completely fine on the outside. I worked in logistics management, long hours, consistent pay, not glamorous. Renata worked part-time at a medical billing office, which she told everyone was full-time, but that is a detail I only understood later. We were not rich. We were not poor. We were what most people call stable, which sometimes means you are both just too tired to notice the cracks. I want to be honest with you about who I was before that night. I was the kind of man who did not ask for much. I had been raised to believe that love meant service, that you proved your value by working hard, staying consistent, and not complaining. My father worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood and never once raised his voice about it. He just worked. I thought that was what a good man looked like. I carried that idea into my marriage like it was a medal. I cooked most nights. I handled the bills. I managed the car maintenance, the yard, the school pickups when Renata had late shifts. I did not keep score because keeping score felt selfish. I told myself that a good partner did not need receipts. A good partner just gave. What I did not understand then, and what this story will make very clear, is that not keeping score is only a virtue if the other person is also choosing not to take advantage of it. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you to the restaurant. It was a Thursday night in late October. Renata's company was hosting a quarterly dinner at a mid-range Italian place on the east side of town. These dinners happened a few times a year. They were not fancy events, but Renata treated them like job interviews. She dressed carefully. She coached me in the car on the way over about what to say and what not to say and which of her colleagues I should avoid lingering near. I always found these dinners a little exhausting, but I went without complaint, because that was what I did. We were seated at a long table with 8 other people. Her manager, Dennis, sat at the head. Her 2 closest work friends, Paula and Gina, were across from us. The others were people I recognized by face but not by name. The wine came early. The bread came early. The conversation was the kind that floats above anything real: weekend plans, traffic complaints, a new restaurant someone had tried. I was doing fine. I was being polite, asking questions, laughing at the right moments. I was wearing the one blazer I owned that Renata had approved of. Then I noticed the man at the table near the window. He was alone. He looked to be in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. He was wearing a clean but visibly old corduroy jacket. His white hair needed a cut. He had ordered what appeared to be a bowl of soup and a glass of water, and he was eating slowly, carefully, the way people eat when they are trying to make something last. There was something about his expression, not sad exactly. Why, but contained, like a person who had learned to take up very little space. Something in me just responded to him. I do not know how to explain it better than that. When our waiter passed, I quietly asked him to add the man's meal to our check. I told the waiter not to make a fuss about it. I asked him to simply tell the man, when the time came, that his meal had been taken care of by someone who hoped he had a good evening. The waiter smiled, he nodded, he moved on. I thought nothing more of it. It was maybe $32. It felt like the right thing to do. But Renata had seen me talking to the waiter. She leaned toward me, and her voice was low enough that only I could hear it, but not low enough that Paula, who was seated directly to her right, could miss the edge in it. She asked me what I had done. I told her simply that I had paid for that man's dinner over there. I nodded toward the window. Renata looked at the man, she looked back at me, and then she said it. She said I was embarrassing. She said we were at a work dinner, not a soup kitchen. She said a man who could barely manage his own finances had no business trying to play hero for strangers. She said it quietly, but she said it completely, and Paula's eyes dropped to her plate in that way people's eyes do when they have heard something they were not supposed to hear. I felt my face go still. I want you to understand that this was not the first unkind thing Renata had ever said to me. But there was something about the location, the audience, even a silent one, that made it land differently. She had said it casually, not in anger exactly, more in exasperation, the way you talk to a child who has done something foolish in public. I looked at her, I picked up my wine glass, I took a slow sip, and I said very quietly that I hoped the food was good. And I turned back to Dennis and asked him about the new routing software his team had been testing. I did not bring it up again that night. But I also did not forget it. We drove home in near silence. Renata made a comment about the food being overpriced. I agreed. She made a comment about Dennis being insufferable. I made a sound that could have been agreement. She said she was tired. I said I would lock up. She went to bed. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Not in anger, not even in hurt exactly. More in a kind of clarity that had been working its way toward me for a while and had finally arrived. I was sitting there thinking, when did I become someone she could say that to in public? When did I become someone whose small kindnesses were things to be corrected? I did not sleep well that night. The next morning, I woke up before Renata. I made coffee. I got Caleb ready for school. I was standing at the counter reading the news on my phone when a notification came through from our joint checking account. It was a deposit alert. We had set up alerts for any transaction over $200, a practical decision we had made years earlier to keep track of the account together. The alert was for a deposit, $420. I frowned. I was not expecting any money. My paycheck did not come until the following Friday. Renata's deposits typically hit on the 1st and 15th. I opened the banking app. I looked at the transaction. It was a transfer from a personal account I did not recognize into our joint account. The memo line said only 2 words, "Thank you." I stared at my phone for a long moment. Then I looked more carefully at the name on the sending account. The last name was Mercer. The first initial was H. I did not know anyone named Mercer. I put the phone down. I got Caleb into his coat, walked him to the bus stop, came back. I poured a second cup of coffee. I picked up the phone again. $420. H. Mercer, thank you. I thought about the man at the window table, the corduroy jacket, the soup and water. I called the restaurant. I know that sounds unusual, but it was the only thread I had. I called and asked if they could tell me anything about the man who had dined alone the night before near the front window. I told the host I had paid for his meal and that I had received something this morning that I thought might be connected to him. I was prepared for them to say they could not help. But the host, a young woman with a patient voice, said she remembered the gentleman. She said he had come in regularly over the past month or so. She said that when the waiter told him his meal was covered, he had cried a little. She said he had asked who had paid for it, and when the waiter pointed discreetly in my direction, the man had nodded very slowly and then sat there quietly for a while before leaving. She did not know his name. She did not have his contact information. I thanked her and hung up. I sat with that $420 for the rest of the morning. It was not a small amount of money. Not for us, not then. And the fact that it had arrived on the morning after that dinner felt like something I was not supposed to ignore. But here is the thing about a moment like that. When something unexpectedly good happens to you, the people closest to you reveal themselves in how they respond. That morning, when Renata came downstairs and I showed her the notification, I was watching her face without meaning to. She looked at the phone, she looked at me, and the first thing she said was, "Are you sure it is not a mistake? Are you sure the account number is right?" She did not say, "Julian, that is incredible." She did not say, "Maybe it was that man from last night." She went straight to suspicion. She went straight to the assumption that something good arriving in my direction was probably an error. I told her I would look into it. She made coffee. The conversation moved on. But I did not forget that either. In the days that followed, I thought a lot about what Renata had said at the dinner. Not in circles, not obsessively, but in a slow, building way. Like someone finally choosing to read the fine print on a contract they had been signing for years. I started paying attention in a different way. I noticed that when I told a story at dinner, any story, even a short one, Renata had a habit of redirecting the conversation before I finished. Not dramatically, just a word or a pivot that sent the room in another direction. I had always interpreted this as her being socially engaged, present, quick. Now I started to wonder if it was something else. I noticed that Renata spoke about money with a particular language. She often referred to the household finances as her responsibility, something she managed, something I benefited from. But I was the one who made more money. I was the one who had set up the joint account. I was the one who automated the mortgage payment, the car insurance, the utility bills. Renata's contribution to the joint account was technically present, but inconsistent in a way I had never examined closely, because examining it closely felt like accusing her of something. I noticed that when Renata's friends came over, she was warm, funny, and physically relaxed in a way she was not when it was just us. Not cold with me, but there was an ease that she had with those women that she did not quite have with me. I had always told myself that was just social chemistry, that couples were not obligated to be each other's best friends. But now I looked at it differently. And then, about 2 weeks after the restaurant dinner, I found the other account. I was not snooping. I want to be clear about that. I was going through the kitchen drawer to find a document I needed for a refinancing inquiry. We had talked about refinancing the mortgage earlier that year, and I pulled out a folder that I assumed was our mortgage paperwork. It was not. Inside the folder were bank statements, not from our joint account, from an account I had never seen before, in Renata's name only. The account had been open for 4 years. The balance on the most recent statement was a little over $31,000. I stood at the kitchen counter for a very long time. 4 years, $31,000, an account I did not know existed. I put the folder back. I put everything back exactly as I had found it. I wrote down the account number and the bank name on the back of a grocery receipt. And then I drove to pick Caleb up from school as if nothing had happened. I want you to understand something about the way I responded to this because it might be different from what you would expect. I did not go home and confront Renata. I did not send an angry text. I did not pull out the folder over dinner and demand an explanation. I was shaking inside, but outside I was exactly the same. I served dinner. I helped Caleb with his math homework. I watched television with Renata for an hour and then told her I was tired and went to bed. I lay in the dark and I thought about everything. $31,000 over 4 years is roughly $650 a month on average. Not an enormous amount, but consistent, deliberate, hidden. Where was it coming from? Was she diverting money from her paycheck? Was she siphoning from our joint account in small amounts I had not tracked carefully enough? Was there another source of income she had never told me about? And the bigger question, one I barely let myself finish thinking, was there another person? I did not know, and because I did not know, I decided not to act on emotion. I decided to find out what was actually true before I said or did anything. This is where things began to shift in a very significant way. I contacted a financial advisor I had worked with briefly 3 years earlier, a man named Garrett who had helped us set up some modest savings after my father passed. I told Garrett I was looking to understand our household. Finances better and that I needed to get clear on what was in our accounts, what our liabilities were, and what I might not be aware of. I kept it professional. I kept it calm. Garrett was thorough. Within a week, he had a full picture of our shared financial situation, what was joint, what was mine individually, what was in my name. What he did not have access to was Renata's personal account. He could not touch that without her cooperation. But he did flag something that I had not noticed. Over the last 32 months, there had been 11 transfers out of our joint account to an external account, each one between $150 and $230, all occurring on the second or third Tuesday of the month. I had never noticed because I only looked at the account when major transactions happened, and individually these amounts were below our alert threshold. 11 transfers, a total of roughly $2,100. Garrett circled them on the printout without comment and slid the paper across the desk. He looked at me the way professional men look at you when they want you to draw your own conclusion without them having to say it. The money was going to the same external account every time. I recognized the last 4 digits. They matched the account I had found in the kitchen drawer. So the hidden account was not just hidden income. It was also being fed from our joint account. She had been pulling money that was partly mine into an account I was not supposed to know about. I drove home from that meeting, and I cooked dinner, and I did not say a word. 2 days later, Renata told me over breakfast that she wanted us to start using a new budgeting app together. She said she had read about it online and thought it would help us be more organized. She even showed me the app on her phone, colorful charts, easy input fields, shared access between partners. I looked at the app. I said it looked good. I said I would download it. I did not download it, because I understood then that the suggestion was not coming from a place of partnership. It was coming from a place of monitoring. If she could see my financial activity in real time, she could know what I knew. She could know if I had found anything. I started keeping a log, not on my phone, on a small yellow legal pad I kept in my gym bag, which was the one place Renata never went. Every unusual transaction I found, I noted. Every inconsistency in her schedule that I cross-referenced against what she had told me, I noted. Every small thing I had filed under probably nothing over the years, I wrote down now and looked at it clearly. The log grew. It was the weekend 3 years ago when Renata had gone to a friend's bachelorette trip to a city 2 states over. I remembered being proud of myself for handling everything alone that weekend. But when I looked back at our credit card statements from that month, the charge I remembered for a hotel in that city was for a room booked for 2 guests, not 1. The room type was a king suite. I had paid the credit card bill without reading the line items. There was the medical bill I had paid 18 months ago, a bill that had arrived in a plain white envelope that Renata had opened and placed on the counter, telling me it was from a specialist she had seen for a minor issue with her knee. I remembered writing the check, but I did not remember checking the billing address on the letterhead, which was for a practice that, when I looked it up now, specialized in couples counseling and individual therapy, not orthopedic surgery, not knee specialists. She had been in therapy, not for a knee issue, for something she did not want to name. There was the evening, almost exactly 2 years ago, when I had come home from a long day of travel to find the house very clean and Renata in an unusually good mood. She had made a nice dinner. She had been affectionate. I had been grateful for it without questioning what had caused the sudden warmth. I had not noticed then, but I noticed now, looking at my own old email, that I had sent her my itinerary 2 days before, listing my return time. The warm welcome had been prepared. It had been staged. I was not paranoid. I want to be very clear about that. I was not a man hunting for reasons to be suspicious. I was a man who had stopped making excuses for things that did not add up. And once I stopped making excuses, there was a lot that did not add up. The next thing that happened was not something I found. It was something that found me. A man named Troy called my cell phone on a Wednesday afternoon. I did not know Troy. He said he had gotten my number from a woman named Gina, one of Renata's work friends who had been at the Italian dinner. He said that he was not trying to cause problems, but that he had been dating someone who had told him something, and he felt that I deserved to know it. I pulled over. Troy told me carefully and without any apparent enjoyment that he had been dating a woman named Brianna for the past several months. Brianna was a friend of Gina's, and Brianna had told Troy that Renata had been seeing someone, an architect named Cole, for the past 2 years. Troy said he had debated for weeks whether to call. He said he had kids of his own, and he knew what a family looked like from the outside, and he would have wanted someone to tell him. He said he was sorry. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was. I thanked him. I asked one question: did he know how Brianna knew this? He said Brianna had met Cole once at a group dinner, and that Renata had introduced him as a coworker, but later that night Renata had privately told Brianna the truth. He said it had apparently been going on for a while. I thanked Troy again. I sat in my car for a few minutes, then I drove home. Renata was at the kitchen counter when I walked in. She smiled and asked how my day was. I told her it was long. I asked what we were having for dinner. She said she had leftover pasta or she could make eggs. I said eggs would be great. She made eggs, we ate together. She talked about something Caleb's teacher had said. I listened. I was calm and attentive and completely resolved. I want to stop here and explain something about the way I was feeling, because I think it matters. I was not numb. I was not broken. I was not in the white-hot rage that stories like mine usually describe at this point. What I was feeling was something colder and quieter than anger. It was the feeling of a man who has been given confirmation of something he already suspected, but had been too loyal or too afraid to look directly at. The truth was not a surprise, it was a conclusion. And once you have reached a conclusion, the work becomes strategic, not emotional. I made an appointment with a family law attorney. Her name was Helen Marsh. She came recommended by a colleague who had gone through a difficult divorce 2 years earlier. I met with Helen at her office on a Friday morning when I had told Renata I had an early meeting downtown. Helen was direct and calm. She did not offer sympathy or make me feel like a statistic. She explained my options, my rights, what the process would look like, and what I needed to do before anything became official. She told me to document financial assets carefully. She told me not to make any large moves yet. She told me to keep behaving normally at home and to begin quietly gathering information. She also told me one thing that changed how I understood my situation. She told me that because the house was in both our names and I had been the primary earner for most of the marriage, my financial exposure in a divorce would likely depend heavily on what Renata could demonstrate about her own independent assets. If Renata had been quietly accumulating money in an undisclosed personal account for 4 years while simultaneously withdrawing from our joint account, that would matter. That would matter quite a bit. I told Helen about the hidden account. I told her about the transfers. I told her about the 11 withdrawals. Helen wrote everything down. Her expression did not change. She told me to get proper documentation of all of it. I already had most of it. I left that meeting with a clarity I had not felt in years. Not happy, not even close, but clear. I knew what I was doing. I knew why I was doing it. And I knew that the pace of it needed to be mine, not driven by emotion. What happened next was something I had not planned, but in retrospect, I think the universe, or luck, or whatever you believe in, decided to help me along. Renata's mother, Donna, called me on a Saturday afternoon while Renata was out with Caleb at a birthday party. Donna and I had always had a decent relationship. She was not warm exactly, but she was civil, and she had always treated me fairly. She asked if I had a few minutes. I said yes. Donna told me she was worried about Renata. She said she had noticed changes in her daughter over the past couple of years, a guardedness, a restlessness, something she could not name exactly. She said she had asked Renata about it directly and had been brushed off. She said she was calling me because she thought I might know something. I sat with that for a moment, and then I made a careful decision. I did not tell Donna what I knew, but I asked her gently if Renata had ever mentioned someone named Cole. There was a long pause, a very long pause, and then Donna said quietly that Renata had mentioned a coworker by that name maybe a year ago in passing, that she had described him as a friend from work. I thanked Donna for calling. I told her I thought Renata was going through some things and that I was trying to be patient. Donna said she was glad I was still standing by her daughter. She said Renata was lucky to have me. I said thank you and ended the call. Donna's call gave me one more thing I needed. It confirmed that the relationship with Cole was not a secret only to me. It was a secret Renata was maintaining even from her own mother. This was not an impulsive affair. This was a sustained, managed, deliberate, parallel life. That meant certain things. It meant she had been planning. It meant she had been protecting something. It meant that the hidden account and the regular transfers and the staged welcome home dinners were all part of a system. And it meant that when things became official, she would not be able to claim it was a moment of weakness. I spent the following 3 weeks doing what Helen had told me to do. I documented the joint account activity. I made copies of the bank statements I had found. I organized 11 months of credit card statements and highlighted items that were inconsistent with Renata's stated schedule or explained activities. I was not building a case for revenge. I was building a record of a life that had not been what I thought it was. I also did one other thing. I wrote a letter, not to Renata, not to Cole, not to anyone I knew. I wrote a letter to H. Mercer, care of the restaurant, because that was the only address I had, asking the staff to please pass it along if the man ever came back in. I thanked him for the deposit, which I had still not touched, and told him it had arrived at a moment when it meant something larger than the money itself. I told him it was the morning after a night when I had seriously needed a reminder that kindness is never a mistake. About a week later, the restaurant called and said that a man named Harold Mercer had come in and picked up my letter. And the day after that, Harold called my number. He was a retired schoolteacher. He had recently lost his wife of 41 years. He had been having a very difficult fall. He had been eating alone most nights because the quiet in his house was unbearable. The night I paid for his meal, he had been sitting there wondering, genuinely wondering, if any of what he was doing still mattered. He said my $32 gesture had not saved his life in some dramatic way, but it had broken something open for him. He said the next morning he had called his son, from whom he had been quietly estranged for almost 3 years, and they had talked for 2 hours. He had wanted to do something. He had researched the restaurant, found the amount he estimated his meal had cost, tripled it, and transferred it to the joint account number he had found on the restaurant's courtesy receipt, which apparently had my name listed as the paying account. He said he hoped it had not been a strange or unwelcome thing to do. I told him it was the most welcome thing anyone had done for me in a very long time. I told him about my situation, not all of it, but enough. He listened the way retired teachers listen, with patience and without judgment. Harold and I have spoken several times since then. He is someone I consider a friend now, which is not something I expected to find in any part of this story, but there it is. The confrontation with Renata happened on a Tuesday evening in February. Caleb was at my sister's for a sleepover. I had arranged that quietly the week before. I had spoken with Helen. I had everything in order. I made dinner. I waited until we had finished eating and the dishes were done and Renata was sitting with her tea. I sat down across from her. I put a folder on the table between us. I said I needed to talk. She looked at the folder. Her face changed. Not dramatically, Renata was not a person who displayed alarm openly, but something in her expression shifted. She set down her tea. I said very calmly that I had become aware of several things that I believed she needed to know I was aware of. I told her I knew about the personal account she had held for 4 years. I told her I knew about the transfers from our joint account. I told her I knew about Cole. I said all 3 of those things in the same tone I might use to discuss a household bill, without shaking, without raising my voice, without any of the theatrics I think she had prepared herself to manage. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she could explain. Then she said it was complicated. Then she said I would not understand the full situation. She said she had been unhappy. She said she had needed something separate that was hers. She said the account was not what I was making it sound like. I let her talk. I did not interrupt. I did not react. I just let her fill the silence. When she stopped, I told her that I was not there to have an argument. I was not there to assign blame or to hear her version of events. I told her that I had already spoken with a family law attorney and that I was prepared to move forward with a separation. I told her that the financial documentation I had gathered had been shared with my attorney. I told her that I was not going to fight, but I was also not going to pretend. She started crying. I want to be honest about that because it would be easy to write that moment as clean and cinematic, and it was not. Seeing someone cry, even someone who has hurt you deeply, is not easy. It was not satisfying to watch. But it also did not change anything for me because I had done a lot of my grieving quietly over the previous weeks. I had already felt what needed to be felt. What was left was just the work. I told her I thought we should focus on what was best for Caleb. I told her I had no interest in making anything ugly. I told her that if she cooperated with the process, I would treat the separation fairly and without unnecessary conflict. She asked if there was any chance, any at all, that we could try again. I thought about that question carefully, not performing consideration, actually considering it. Then I told her no. I told her that I had given 11 years of absolute loyalty and consistent care, and that I had been met in return with a public humiliation in front of her colleagues, a hidden financial account, systematic withdrawals from our joint funds, and a 2-year relationship she had chosen over our marriage. I told her I did not say any of that with anger. I said it as the reason I knew my answer was no. She did not have a response to that. I slept in the guest room that night and every night after, until I moved into an apartment 6 weeks later. Now let me tell you what happened in the months that followed, because this part of the story is not dramatic, but it is, I think, the most important part. The divorce process was not simple, but it was not as destructive as I had feared. Helen was calm and excellent. Renata's attorney made some early aggressive moves around the division of assets, but when our attorney introduced the documentation I had gathered, the personal account, the 4 years of transfers, the total withdrawn from joint funds, those aggressive moves became much more cautious. The hidden account had to be disclosed. The transfers were on record. Renata's attorneys knew that a judge would see this clearly. The financial settlement was fair. I will not go into every detail, but I will say that the $31,000 in the undisclosed account became a significant point of discussion that ultimately worked strongly in my favor. The house was sold. We split the equity. I received more than I would have received in a simple 50-50 calculation. I want to be honest about this. Money is not what made me feel better. The process of not being taken advantage of made me feel better. The quiet insistence on fairness, not revenge, not punishment, just accuracy, that was what gave me back some piece of myself. Caleb stayed primarily with me. That was the outcome I had worked hardest for. I did not try to turn him against Renata. I would not do that to him, and I believe deeply that a child needs both parents in his life if both are safe to be around. But I also made sure that my stability, my consistency, my presence in his daily life was fully documented and demonstrated. The custody arrangement reflected that. Caleb is doing well. He is 9 now. He is funny and curious and obsessed with animals. Every morning he asks me something completely unpredictable, like how much a blue whale weighs or whether birds can see in the dark. I love every one of those questions. I love being the person he asks them to. There is something I want to tell you about the weeks right after Renata and I separated. Something that is harder to explain, but that I think is the truest part of this story. I was sitting in my new apartment, a small, clean, quiet space that was entirely mine, and I realized that I was not miserable. I had expected to be miserable. I had assumed that the end of 11 years would feel like a collapse. Instead, what I felt was something closer to the feeling you get when you set down a very heavy bag after carrying it for a long time. Not joy exactly, not relief exactly, something in between, a kind of spaciousness. I called Harold Mercer that week. He asked how I was doing. I told him about the apartment. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something I have thought about many times since. He said that most people spend their whole lives confusing loyalty with endurance, and that knowing the difference was a kind of wisdom that most men only find when it is forced upon them. I think about that often. Renata and I have spoken a handful of times since the divorce was finalized, mostly about Caleb's schedule and schooling. She is civil. Sometimes she is more than civil. Occasionally there is something almost like regret in the way she speaks to me, a softness she did not have when we were married. I do not engage with it. I do not need her to feel badly. I do not need anything from her now, which is one of the strangest and most liberating realizations I have ever had. Cole, for what did I?'s worth did not last. I heard this from Gina, who apologized to me separately and at length at a school event, mortified at what her friend Brianna had set in motion. Cole and Renata split up about 4 months after our divorce was finalized. I have no feelings about this either way. Donna, Renata's mother, called me once after the divorce. She was crying. She apologized. She said she had not known the full picture. I told her I believed her and that I held nothing against her. She thanked me for how I was treating Caleb. I told her that Caleb loved her and that I would always make sure they had time together. She said I was a good man. I thanked her. I meant it when I said I believed she was sorry. My sister, who had known something was wrong for years but had respected my choices without pushing, told me over dinner about 3 months after the divorce that she had been waiting for me to see it. She said she had watched me make myself smaller and smaller to fit inside Renata's version of our life, and that she had not known how to say it without damaging our relationship. I told her I understood. I told her I was not sure I would have listened even if she had. She said probably not. We both laughed. It was the first real laugh I had felt in a long time. I still have the $420 from Harold. It is in a separate savings account, untouched. I told Harold this and he laughed and said I was being ridiculous. I told him it was not about the money. He understood. I'm not going to tell you that I became a better man through pain, or that the betrayal was secretly a gift, or that everything happens for a reason. I do not believe in those framings. What I believe is simpler and harder. I was a good man who gave everything and was still not enough for someone who had already decided to leave in her heart. That is a painful truth, but it is also, finally, a clean one. I am not waiting to be rescued. I am not angry. I am not performing wellness for anyone. I am just living, carefully, honestly, with more awareness than I had before. If there is one thing I want you to take from Julian's story, it is this. Quiet generosity is never a weakness. It is who you are. The people who tell you it is embarrassing are not telling you about your generosity. They are telling you about themselves. That man at the window table, Harold, eating his soup alone, he received $32 of kindness and gave back 420. Not because that is how generosity works, but because it was what he could give and he wanted to give it. That is all generosity ever is. You give what you can without keeping score to whoever needs it most. Renata said I was embarrassing for doing that. I think that was the truest thing she ever said about herself. Julian's story is not about a dramatic explosion. It is about a man who was so quietly dedicated that he missed the signs until they were impossible to ignore. He did not fall apart. He did not beg. He simply opened his eyes, picked up a pen, gathered the truth, and let it do its work. If any part of this story hit somewhere close to home, if you have ever stayed too long, given too much, or been made to feel small for being kind, I want to know. Tell me in the comments what you would have done at that dinner table. Would you have paid for the stranger's meal? And could you have stayed as calm as Julian did when the truth finally came out? Because I think the answer says everything about where you are in your own story.